So, hey, I shot quite a few videos in a binge in reply to some of the discussions going on the comments on the video I did the other day about meaning and God and where we do and do not apply these criticisms. But I wanted to cut in here. This is not part of that series. I shot this on a separate night. Wanted to cut in with a quick comment about scientific truth. Because we get this gets into some very confused territory very quickly, and we run anytime we talk about the kinds of information that science investigates, the data that it generates. In very broad and general terms, we do kind of flirt with that scientific transcendentalism that I was talking about in a prior video, and in so doing, sabotage the mechanisms of skepticism and very, very minute claim that scientific inquiry relies on in order to produce the results that we all enjoy. Because. However much you may hear me criticize it, go ahead and flip back through my channel back to Our Poetic Scientists, and I'm actually a really big fan. I'm a really big fan of science in general, physics in particular, but scientific inquiry. The epistemology that scientific inquiry is built on is a probabilistic one. Like I was talking about in a prior video, we observe a set of conditions, and in this set of conditions, over a number of iterations of those conditions with variations in those conditions so that we can see how variations impact result, we see these variations or reiterations of result, and based on that, we can come to some prediction of how differing sets of conditions produce differing results. This is what allows us to make the predictions that we utilize in technology, in the construction of technology, that we can reasonably predict that when I run an electrical charge through this material of this density, of this thickness, with this insulating medium, with this characteristic of the current, I will get these results, and based on repeated observation. Now, when we start talking about what is true, we are talking atemporally. We are not talking predictably. We are not talking about predictivity anymore at that point. We're talking about metaphysics. We're talking about epistemology. We may be talking about cosmology. We may be talking about the nature of reality, the nature of meaning, and these are, I feel, very important questions, if only because, for those of you who don't necessarily see any direct benefit in those fields in their own right, if only because the rarefication of process and procedure involved in a discipline of sequential conclusions that does not lend itself to empirical verification encourages developments of procedural discipline that you won't find elsewhere. In a material sciences environment, you can find out whether you're right or wrong by putting it to the test. In a discipline that exists purely, that operates purely conceptually, you don't really have that error checking mechanism. And so ideally, you account for that, or you work around that, by applying as vicious scrutiny and as exhaustive discipline and self-control and self-inquiry as you can in that process. And along the way, these disciplines of internal consistency and investigative vigor spill over to other disciplines as well. So even if you don't think that serious contemplation of the philosophical problems of human existence merit the time that we dedicate to it, if you don't view that as beneficial in its own right, it is still beneficial and necessary for the support of development of these other disciplines like mathematics and material sciences. That whole process breaks down when we ascribe to scientific inquiry the leaps that are involved in saying that a thing is true, saying that a thing is real. Those aren't the kinds of descriptions of observation that disciplined scientific inquiry involves. They're directly contrary to the scientific vigor required. And if you haven't, you know what? I'll go ahead. I'll put a practical suggestion forward. Go to scholar.google.com, and in that very familiar search box, type in a subject of interest and see what comes up. The thing I love about this, these are research papers, white papers, published journal articles, what have you, from the academic communities of the disciplines pertinent to the subject that you put into the search terms. You can find out how these claims are structured, and what you'll find is that the language is very discreet, very, very discreet. Rarely will you find a scientific experiment that describes we saw X causing Y, or because of mechanism A, from condition B we saw result C. The language is more like in condition X, given these variables, we observed outcome Y a certain number of times. There is a lot of effort in scientific writing put into keeping the philosophical claims very small. And this is something I talked about earlier, about the necessity of small claims. Check it out for yourself. We live in an era where this does not have to be mysterious. We don't have to guess what goes on in the scientific community. And for that matter, we don't have to wait for mainstream media to put their spin on it either. Which, by the way, almost invariably journalism relating to science practices this horrible confusion about what claims are actually being made, in order to sensationalize it, in order to sell the story. But we don't have to rely on that. You don't have to rely on that. If you want to find out you can find out for yourself, and I suggest you do.